What's up, y'all? Welcome to the Book of John online commentary. We're in chapter 2 today. A big chapter because we see three themes kind of develop in this chapter. The first being that Jesus is not an ordinary person. The second being that Jesus predicts his death and resurrection. And by resurrection, we mean that Jesus was killed on a cross, and 3 days later, he rose from the grave, conquering death. And very early on in his ministry, Jesus predicts this. And the third thing we see is that Jesus did not come to be an earthly ruler. He is not putting his trust in humanity. And so looking at how do we know Jesus wasn't ordinary? Well, he performs his first public miracle, and that he turns water into wine at a wedding that he has been invited to. And it's kind of an interesting scene because it seems as if Mary, the mother of Jesus, is prompting him, like, she obviously knows something is different about Jesus. And it's kind of funny to think about, like, your mom pushing you to do this, but Jesus, she knows something is different about him. And so she prompts Jesus to perform this miracle. And when we read in verse 3, it says, "When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, 'They have no wine.' And Jesus said to her," he replies to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." And as you're reading through John 2, you might be thinking, wow, that seems really harsh. Like, woman, what does this have to do with me? But when you look at the original language, the Greek language that this was written in, this is not a harsh term when Jesus says woman. It would actually be like referring to someone as a lady, a term of endearment and respect. And Jesus is making the point of, like, hey, I don't operate on your timetable. I operate on the timetable of God. But we see that even though Jesus responds here, it was his time to begin to show the world who he was in performing this miracle. The second thing we see is Jesus predicts his death and resurrection. And he does this in Jerusalem as he's going. Remember, Jesus is a Jewish person. Jesus is a devout Jew. And who were the Jews? The Jews were God's chosen people. The Old Testament, the first half of the Bible, right, is God's interaction with his chosen people, the Jewish people, the Israelite people. And Jesus was a Jewish person, so it would make sense that he would go to this Passover celebration in Jerusalem. And what was Passover celebrating? When we refer to the law last time on the last video, we know the law was given in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and reiterated in Deuteronomy. Well, one of the stories we see in Exodus is the story of God freeing his chosen people, the Israelite people, from enslavement, from slavery by the Egyptian people. And so they're delivered out of Egypt, out of their slavery. And what they're doing is they're celebrating this event via the Passover festival. Years and years later, the Jewish people are still remembering what God has done. However, there's kind of a problem going on within the Jewish community at this time. And what it was is they were not taking the law of God seriously. So Jesus walks into the temple, this place that's supposed to be a place of worship. And what he's seeing is that money changers are handling money in an inappropriate way, and that they're not following the law that was laid out by God. And the money changers, people would come and travel for this Passover festival. People would come and travel to make sacrifices. And what were sacrifices? Like, why were animals being sacrificed? Well, the point of the law in the Old Testament, the commandments that God gave to his people, they were all about truth, remember? And they were to show people that on their own, they could not meet the requirements of this law. And so they would offer animal sacrifices as a symbolic act of, hey, this is for the sins that I have committed. And what we see is Jesus actually takes the place of this later on, that his death on the cross, his offering up of himself is actually going to be the atonement for our sins, the covering for our sins that we need later on. But that hasn't happened yet. But the Jewish people were really making a mockery of what was going on. People would travel from a long way. These money changers, as they would get foreign means of currency, would rip people off and actually not make a fair valued trade with the money that was coming in. And then also we see that Jesus, he's unhappy because they're not following the law that is laid out. And what does he do? He makes a whip. He's flipping over tables, and he drives people out of the temple. And a lot of people think, hey, Jesus is soft, nice guy. And he was perfect, full of kindness, but also full of holiness and righteousness. And he saw this sin that was happening, and he drove people out of the temple that were doing this. Could you imagine the authority that Jesus had to be able to drive people from this place? Like, why wouldn't they have turned and just attacked him and kicked him out? But that's the authority that Jesus has. And they ask him, like, hey, by what authority you're doing this? And Jesus says, hey, destroy this temple, and again, I will build it back up in 3 days. And they don't understand that he's talking about his own physical body. This is Jesus saying, hey, you're going to crucify me, you're going to destroy this temple, but in 3 days, my body's going to rise again, and I'm going to defeat death. And then in the last section, what we see is because of what Jesus has done, he's on the scene now. People are beginning to follow him. People are beginning to seek him. And what he's saying here in the last part of chapter 2 is, I know the heart of man. My hope is not in them. They're going to try and make me an earthly ruler, but I came with a spiritual mission in mind, and I know the heart of man. I don't need to put my trust in him, because the heart of mankind, the heart of humanity, is deceitful, and we still fight that same battle today.